Hey there, in this one we are going to be talking all about files. That's creating files, retrieving them or updating them, and even downloading them from the internet. So to do this, let's go ahead and jump into the terminal. I'm going to make a new directory called day 10, and we want to put it in a string here, so day 10, and we're going to cd into day 10. Okay, so we'll go ahead and go into Python 3. Now, you might be familiar with the term of open. And if you're not, that's okay. That's what we're going to be talking about here mostly. Open is how we actually can open some part on our system that allows me to add things to it or read from it. So what we want to do is declare a new variable called fname, and I'm going to just call this hello-world.txt. Right, so this is going to be my file name. Fname is often what people refer file name to. And I'm going to go ahead and use open. And I'm going to say file object equals to open. So using that built-in feature or function of Python called open. We'll say fname. And we're going to pass this w in here. I'll explain that in a little bit. And then I'll hit enter. And then file underscore object dot write. And I'll say hello world. And then finally, of course, close it off, open the parentheses, and close the parentheses just like that. And then finally, we're going to close that open call. So we'll do file object.close. Okay, so I opened up a file, I wrote to it, and then I closed it. Okay, so let's go ahead and look in VS Code now inside of day 10, which I just created, and hello world.txt, and there it is. There's my hello world. Pretty simple, right? Now, this actual way of writing is not the preferred way, but a way that you might see from time to time. The preferred way is to say with open fname and then w, and then you set it as, let's say, for instance, we'll keep it in as file object, and then notice those three dots. That means we need a tab in this case. I'm going to go ahead and say file object.write, and we'll say hello world again. Hit enter a couple times, and what do you know? So the with call is definitely how you're going to want to go about doing this or writing to files. Now the next thing is actually reading the contents of that file. So I'm going to clear out of this Python shell, and I'm going to clear that again. I just want to make sure that I have a clean Python shell, so I'll go ahead and import, or rather set fname equaling to, and what did we call it? We called it hello world.txt, hello-world.txt. Now we'll go ahead and do with open fname. This time we'll use R, and I'll set it as F, and then we'll just go ahead and print out f.read. And notice that there's two parentheses. We hit enter a couple times, and what do you know? It actually gets the content for me. Now if I try to do f.read down here, it's going to say, hey, it's already been closed. That file has been closed. And that's the point of using with, is it opens and closes it for me automatically. Now, another thing about this is if I open it in that mode and then try to do f.write another and hit enter a couple times, this operation is not permitted because of the mode that we opened it in. So it's a good time to talk about these different modes. If you go to the Python 3 library for open, the functions portion of it, or built-in functions portion of it, you can see that these are all of the different ways on how you can use any given open call. You can open it to read. This is the default. It's just going to read it. It's not going to be able to actually write to it. It doesn't have permission to do that. You've got W for writing, which we've already seen. W will also override what's already in there. X is saying that basically this is a first-time creation. If you already have a file there, it's not going to do anything. It's going to run an error. Next, appending. This is really good for adding to a file. This is often what you'll use for CSV files. B is in binary mode, as in if you're downloading from the internet, there's a really good chance that you're downloading bytes. So you would use the binary mode for that. That often really helps with that. And then text mode is the default. I'm going to show you how to work with binary mode in a little bit. Text mode as in being when I actually read or wrote the content that we did, it was in text mode. So again, we'll show you binary mode a little bit later. So this is kind of nice. I have a way to now open files and read their contents. So what I want to do is go back into VS Code, and I'm going to make a new folder in here, and I'm going to call this templates. And this template, I'm going to make a new file, and I'll call it email.txt. And in here, I'll just say hello name. How's it going? Notice that I'm using .txt, so I don't need to put quotes, I don't need to put strings, I don't need to do any of that stuff because it's a text file, it's not a Python file. So now that we've got that, let's go back into day 10, and I'll just go ahead and use this file_manager.py. This is just an arbitrary name that I'm using so we can test and work with these things. So we have email.txt inside of this directory right next to filemanager.py, right? So filemanager.py is not inside of templates, it's next to it. They're on the same path, or they're in the same exact directory, which we could verify by going into it, and we see that they're on the same directory. Okay, cool. So file manager, that means that I can say that my email text equals to, well, templates / email.txt. Now, if you're on Windows, you might be like, well, hey, Windows paths are slightly different. In other words, if I wanted to look at, let's go ahead and exit out of the shell here, clear this. If I do pwd on a Mac, this is what I get, right? That's the actual path to where things are. So adding a slash to this and getting something like that sort of makes sense, right? So in other words, if I cd'd into templates and I list things out, or rather pwd, I see that now this is my path, right? And if you add email.txt with a slash here, that's going to be the path to that object, which is even more clear if we actually open up the Finder, hit Command I for the info. We see the actual direct path to it right there. Okay, so that's another way to see it. So in other words, this slash is a problem, and we need to do something about it. But before I do, I just want to show you that we can open this data now. So I'll go ahead and say my content is equal to just an empty string. And then we'll go ahead and say with open email_txt. And we want to read it. So we'll declare read, or R, and we'll say as f. And then we'll say content equals to f.read. And then we're going to go ahead and print out content.format name equals to Justin. Okay, we got this curly brackets there. Let's go ahead and see what happens here. Okay, so now let's go ahead and cd back into our project here. Python 3 file_manager.py. I hit enter. What do you know? It's now using that as a template. But I made a big deal about how this is organized, or where it's located, because if you're on a Windows, that may have not worked for you. It might have, but to make sure that it's going to work, we use something called OS. So OS is a module that works across our different systems, that is off Linux, Mac, and Windows, because Python is cross-platform. So we just do os path.join, and then we get the things that we want to turn into a path, essentially. So the first thing is templates, that's the directory. The next thing is the file name, which is email.txt, and then we hit like that. So now it's going to be a little bit better of a path itself, because I could send this to you on a Windows and it will work. If I run that again, what do you know? There it is. Okay, cool. So that's a really good start as far as opening up this file. But the problem is, if I cd back one directory and run Python 3 day 10 / file_manager.py and hit enter, I get this error. It's saying no such file or directory, templates / email.txt, right? Because this is a relative path relative to file_manager.py. But when I actually run this file or run Python 3 in a different directory, it's no longer relative. It's going relative to the directory that it currently is. In other words, it's looking inside of 30 days for a directory called templates, and a file name email.txt, which just simply does not exist. So we need to go one step further, and that is making a absolute path to the email.txt. So to get the absolute path, there's a couple ways that we could go about doing this. First, what we could do is get the absolute path of the file that we're on. So we'll say this file path equals to os.path.absolute path, or ABS path, and then we use 2 underscores of file. Now by default, when you run Python on a file or a module like this, this will actually turn into an object that actually works for this call. In other words, if I tried to do this inside of the Python 3 shell or any Python shell, it's going to give me this file is not defined. But again, inside of a module, it will be defined. So if I go ahead and print out what that module is and save everything, and then go back into the terminal, exit out of here, and press up a couple times and hit run, notice that it actually gives me the absolute path on my system to that file manager .py file. Now this is telling us that, hey, that's pretty cool. I now have the exact directory or the exact place of where that file is. And if I moved it around, it would still do that. It would still tell me exactly where it is. And that's true on your system as it would be on mine. So the final thing is I need to now use something called base dir. This is a very common practice, is to set a base directory, as in the root of your project, as in I've got all of my code here. Where is that directory? What is it? Now we know it's in day 10, right? But if I move this code around, it might be in day 11 or day 12 or so on. So what I need to do then is ospath.dirname of this file path. So this is getting the directory name, or that top level directory name of this right here. So looking back in the terminal, essentially what osdir does is it looks at this directory right here. If you ran osdir again, it would go for this directory. If you did it again, it would be this directory. If you did it again, it would be this directory, and so on. So in other words, let's go ahead and say that's my base directory. Let's call this my entire project dir. And then I call ospath.dirname on that base directory. This will give me this 30 days project here. So we can go ahead and print that out with base dir, and entire project dir. Okay, so let's go ahead and run that again. Still going to get that error, but if I run it again, I see we've got the absolute path here. We've got the base directory or base dir that we set, and then we have the project directory, right? So it's now showing me all of those locations. Now you're going to want to play around with this as much as you can to get a really good sense as to where these things are. And then when we do ospath.join, what that allows me to do is take any of these and join it with this stuff right here. And it's going to join it by a slash. So if you use .txt, you want to make sure that you are using the actual file name if that's what the path ends in. So in other words, I can now say, take this base directory. I don't need these print statements anymore. But now I can use this base directory to find exactly where that email path is. And so now I should actually render out that content. I'm going to press up and run that. Notice that there I am. Okay, cool. So the next thing is I'm going to go ahead and open up a new terminal window just to show you. And I'm going to run Python 3. And I'm going to grab that absolute path that we printed out before. No worries if you're not doing this. I'm going to put it in quotes, hit enter. What do you know? It's still doing that exact same template. And that's absolutely the point of doing this. And even though it might feel like, hey, well, what does this have to do with opening and writing files? It has everything to do with it, because you need to be able to write them and open them exactly where you need them to be. And thus the path portion is very, very important. Okay, cool. So now that we've got that, let's go ahead and try one more thing, and I'll say storing or store files.py. So this time I'm going to go ahead and do an iteration that's similar to what we just did. So we're going to go ahead and import OS, And then again, I'm going to go ahead and get my base dir here. And this is going to be ospath.dirname of ospath.absolute path of this file. So I just chained what we just did together. That's it. It's not really any different. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make another directory. I'm going to go ahead and say that my file's dir is ospath.join base dir, and I'm going to set something called images. And then I'll go ahead and say if not ospath.exists, as in does it exist or not, we're going to go ahead and print out this is not a valid path. Okay, so let's go ahead and save that. I'm going to close out of the shell there. I'm going to clear all this out, and I'm going to navigate back into day 10, and I'm going to run Python 3 store_files.py, hit enter. This is not a valid path. Now that should be no surprise because I have no directory in here called images, right? So every once in a while you might have this call to prevent what is about to happen, right? And realistically, you would probably put this into a function of some kind and run it there, but this is more for illustration purposes than anything else. So what I want to do then is I want to actually make this directory if it does not exist. So something that's really cool about Python, I'm going to go ahead and comment this out with command / is something called os.makeDirs. And now we can pass in a path here. And we can also pass in an argument called _exist OK. And you can set that equal to true. Okay, so VS Code will give you these options as well. But what this is doing is it's going to absolutely make all of the directories that are in here, meaning if I went even further and said something like that, this will make all of those directories regardless of whether or not they exist. And it's just going to ignore that, hey, these already exist. If you said false here, it would run an error, which you can try. But again, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that those images are there. And I'm going to assume that this works. Next, I'm going to go ahead and say my images equals to, and I'm just going to use, let's just use a range of 0 to 12. Okay, so I'm using a range now, so that means I can loop through this quote unquote my images. I'll go ahead and say for I in my images. Now I'm going to go ahead and say fname equals to, let's use some string substitution in here. I'm going to pass in I, and I'll do .jpeg, and then we're going to go ahead and get the file path, and we'll do ospath.join, and we want to join the files directory, and we also want to add in fname there. Now this is another option for saying, hey, if this actually exists, if ospath, if this file path exists, then we will just go ahead and hit continue. So that will skip that loop. So I'll go ahead and say print, and we'll do skipped fname. Okay, we won't see that this first run, but we'll see it in just a moment. Now I'll go ahead and say with open, and we're going to grab that file path again, and I'm going to write and as f, and then I'm going to go ahead and do f.write hello world. So instead of JPEG for just the moment, we'll just go ahead and say .txt. Okay, so this is looping through some random range, and we're just making random files, and there we go. So let's go ahead and save this, and let's try and run it. If I list everything out here, there it is, and if I run store files, I list everything out again. I now have a directory called images. Inside of here, I have all of those images, or the files that would have been images, right? So we got 0, 1, and so on. Okay, so that is how we can actually run and create files on a bigger scale. Now, you might be wondering, well, when would I actually do something like this? Well, the idea of this would be that if you had a lot of data, let's say, for instance, you have 50 different emails that you want to send, and you want to store them in here, or you're downloading a bunch of URLs or a bunch of images and you wanted a quick and easy way to, number one, rename them, but number two, put them where you want them to go. So if we run this again, and let's go ahead and make sure that this is string substitution here. I'm going to run it again, and now it's saying that it's skipped all those things, right? So it's not going to automatically override them, which is pretty cool. This is another way to just use OS path to check whether or not something actually exists. Okay, so that's looping through to create a bunch of different files. This is something you'll do from time to time, maybe not always, but it is nice to know that you can do it. The final thing is going to be download from URL. Okay, so downloading from URL requires us to actually be able to open up a URL, right? So to do this, I'm going to use Python requests. So Python requests is a third-party package, and we need to make sure that we have it. So let's go ahead and clear this out with Python 3-m pip install requests. I mean, we certainly did this in other videos, but I just want to make sure that our Python 3 definitely has Python requests. And we're going to be using very similar features for this. So again, we're going to do the base dir, and we want, of course, to import OS. The base directory being ospath.dirname. And I'll go ahead and say this file path, ospath.absolute path of the file. Yes, I want to show you how to do both ways all the time. And now we've got our base directory, and I'll go ahead and say downloads dir equals to ospath.join the base dir, and also just downloads. And os.makeDirs, we're going to do the downloads dir and exist okay equaling to true. Okay. So now we need to actually download a URL. So I'm going to go into Chrome, and I did a Google search for a lake just to grab an image. I'm going to grab this one from Wikipedia, and I'm going to control click or right click on it, copy image address, and I should get something like that, right? So let's just make sure that it ends in .jpeg, or yeah, basically you want to make sure it ends in JPEG and has HTTPS, not something like data : you don't want that, because that's not what we're working on right now. Okay, so now we've got this URL, and you might be remember that requests, we can do request.get a URL, and we can also put something like stream equals to true, which means that it's going to keep it open until we actually get that data done. And then I can say with open, well, let's actually add a file path here, and I'll say downloaded img path equals to os.path.join the downloads dir. And I already noticed that my URL has a JPEG, or it's using .jpeg. So I'm going to go ahead and say just one.jpg. Okay, so that's the path I want to use. So with open, and then we're going to write bytes. So WB, that's where that B comes in, coming back to here. Right, so this is now in binary and write mode, and then we'll do as f, and then we can do f.write r.raw. So r.raw, or rather r.contents for right now. So r.contents will give me whatever this request sends back, and we'll also say r.raise for status, which means that if it's not a 200 status, it's going to run an error for us. So we can see that in just a moment as well. All right, so now I've created a way to download an image from this URL. Let's go ahead and try it out. And it's Python 3 download underscore from underscore URL.py. We hit enter, and oops, I did contents. It should be content. Okay, so we try that again, press up, and no errors. If we go into downloads, notice the directory is there. We go to one.jpg, and sure enough, there it is. So that's pretty cool. We can also try r.raw, like I mentioned before. Do that same thing. It's looking for a bytes-like object, right? So this is a little bit different doing r.raw. So we will use r.raw, but not in this fashion, or not how we did it at least. So that's one way to do it, is r.content. But if we have a little bit bigger of an item, we need to do a different method. Okay, so this is for a small-ish item. But a foolproof item, an item that always works, is using another library that's built into Python called SHUtil, or like shell utility. Now don't worry, because we're not going to go too much into that. This is the main use that you'll probably have for it now. But SHUtil allows you to do things that OS Path also can do, but SHUtil is just a little bit more efficient, especially for downloading large files. So what I'm going to do here then is, yet again, I'm using that same download path. This time I'm going to go ahead and say with requests.get URL stream equaling to true as R. Then we're going to go ahead and grab this out. So now I can actually use R raw. And the reason for that is because my request has not closed. The way this works is it will potentially close your request. This will keep it open. This little block will keep it open until it's done with the code that's below it. And instead of doing f.write, we are going to do shutil.copy file object. And then we grab the data that we want to put into it, and then the actual file object itself, which we declared right there. So if we said file object or file obj, we would set that there, and it's still going to run off. Notice that this is still word wrapped, so these are tabbed in. This is still just line 21. Yours will definitely look a little bit different than that. Okay, so if we save that, I actually don't want to use this same image path. Instead, what I want to do is use the name of the file that is from that URL. So to do that, it's really simple. We're going to go ahead and say the file name. So I'll give it file name, or DL file name, equals to ospath.basename. This is yet another one that you might end up using of the URL. So the actual end URL name. That could be a path or a URL, as we'll see in just a moment. And then new DL path equals to ospath.join, download dir, and DL file name. And now I'm going to go ahead and put that in there. And so at the end of this, we should see two different images inside of that download. So back in the terminal, I'm going to go ahead and clear everything out, press up a couple times, run it. I don't have any errors, but now I see that I have two different files. One is one that I renamed. The other is the actual image itself. So let's go ahead and just double check to make sure that that image did download, because it's certainly possible that it did not, because VS Code was not showing it. But there it is. It's actually downloaded, and it's downloaded exactly the same. Like the file size is the same, and it looks like the dimensions are the same as well. But of course, when we look at these files, or the way I actually downloaded them, this is not great, right? So they're not functions. I can't actually reuse this at all. This was just an example, right? So inside of our files, what I want to do is just break this down a little bit. I actually want to make a download utility. So I'm going to make a new file in here and call this download_util.py. And I'm just going to copy the actual one that I recommend that you use, which is this one right here. I'm just going to copy parts of it. So we'll go ahead and say download file, and we'll grab the URL and then the base directory, or simply the directory. And then that way, where we actually download it will come right there. So this gives me that file path and all that. And then after it does download, we can return whatever that file path is. Okay, so this is the directory that we want to store it. And then this is going to go through and download all that. So with this, I need to import a few things, of course. Import OS. We're going to import requests. We're going to import SHUtil. That should handle all of my imports. And then I want to just go ahead and come back into download from URL. and import that new download utility, which was just download file. So we'll do from download util, import that download file. And the final part of this one is going to be that same URL, and then the destination that we want to use, or the destination directory that we want to use. With this, I'm going to go ahead and just comment this other one out and rename the classic to 2.jpg. And what I should see after I run this is that it will actually download that correct file, and it will download it with its current name. Okay, cool. So naturally, our utility function here could rename that file. So I could say, let's say fname equals to none, and we'll say if fname equals to none, then we'll get that file DL file name, which really we should just probably call this the actual file name, and then the new path is here. So DL path, taking that directory, and then finally that DL path and all that. Cool. And then again, shortening things up a little bit for reusability. Sweet. So now we've got a way to download a URL directly from any URL that we want, which pretty much is any file too. We can grab the directory we want to store it in, and then finally we can change the file name if we want. Otherwise, it's going to come off of the URL itself. So that's it. Now we have a way to open files, to write to them, to store actual data in them downloaded from the internet. And as long as you have access to that URL, you can absolutely download it. Now, keep in mind, if we look at that URL, you should probably recognize what it is that it looks most like. Whoops, not that one. Let's go ahead and copy that image address. And aside from the .com part, let's take a look. Look what this looks like. Doesn't that look like directories or dir paths? That's why OS path can work and work really well regardless of what system you're on. This will actually help you download very large files. Okay, cool. I will copy and paste one other piece that you may see from time to time. It's roughly the same as what we just did, but it does not use SHUtil. You can actually chunk things out. This actually takes a little bit more memory from Python, which is why I didn't do it this method. And this is yet another way to actually grab that file name. I'm just leaving this in here as reference. Let's say slower. It's also a little bit slower too than SHUtil from various tests, which you could test yourself as well. So thanks for watching. We will see you in day 11.